Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The Senate recently reintroduced a bill that will regulate the use of social media in Nigeria. The said it will curb fake news on the internet. It would be recalled that a similar anti-social media bill introduced by the previous 8th Senate sparked outrage across the country and was later withdrawn. Meanwhile, just yesterday, the Senate reintroduced a bill that seeks to penalize persons found guilty of hate speech. The National Commission for the Prohibition of Hate Speech bill, sponsored by the Chief Deputy Whip, Aliyu Abdullahi, was one of the 12 bills introduced on the floor of the Senate on Tuesday. Lawmakers are expected to debate the details of the bill another legislative day. Well, to discuss this and more, we're now being joined by Lanre Arongundade, Director of the International Press Center, Lagos. Welcome to the morning show. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Well, Tundu already introduced the subject. On November 5, we had what they call Internet Falsehood and Manipulations Bill, which was tabled by Senator Mohammed Musa. And then yesterday you had the National Commission for the Prohibition of Fake Speech Establishment, ETC bill, which was presented by Senator Sabi Abdullahi. Now, for you as a journalist or as a citizen, and even as an activist, what do you think is going on here?
Well, I think what is going on is a little bit stranger than fiction, because you have this unusual preoccupation, with, regulating, the social media, with hate speech, up to and including the fact that our Senate wants to establish a national commission for the prohibition of whatever they call hate speech. And my first instinct is to say that this will be an absolute waste of public resources. You are talking about, cutting down the size of government. You are saying the vice president has too many heads. We're spending too much on, office holders. Even on the senators themselves, we're spending too much. They're earning what they should not earn when you look at the kind of work they do. Now you want to talk about a national, commission to prohibit what? Not to prohibit, collapsing infrastructures, not to prohibit decadence in our hospitals, not to prohibit falling standards of education, to prohibit, hate speech. I think it's absolute, bladderdash and arrant nonsense. And people like us, our generation, did not fight for this democracy to have this kind of, jokes in the name of, legislation. And I feel that we should just tell our senators that, yes, we are against hate speech. As journalists, we do not subscribe to it. In the last elections, we brought out a Nigerian Media Code of Election Coverage that has a chapter, on hate speech. But the truth of the matter is that there are laws that can be used, to deal with situations like this. And if you are looking at the direction of regulation, you're talking about social media or the internet, you can then say, okay, we can categorize this in the realm of maybe broadcasting. So you could look at the National Broadcasting Act, for example, and see how that could be amended to take care of, elements, of, hate speech. And, the whole thing really, what is worrisome to me is the fact that even some so-called academics are justifying all this. I was reading somewhere that an associate professor of mass communication said that, as a matter of fact, only trained journalists should use the social media. Ordinary citizens should not use the social media. We need to understand the fact that the social media has two sides to it. The first side is that it has expanded the frontiers for citizens to express their opinions on public issues. We are not saying that in the presence of that expression, they should do anything they like. Now, what is hate speech itself? Hate speech is about any speech that denigrates or attacks, a person or group of persons on the basis of race, on the basis of religion, or on the basis of sex, on the basis of gender. So, to that extent, there are multi-stakeholders when you are talking about hate speech. We in the media, we are stakeholders. Women groups are stakeholders. Other groups in the society. So, for you to think of any form of regulation, you must have multi-stakeholders dialogue. We must all agree that within the Nigerian context, what constitutes, hate speech, and how best do we, regulate it, rather than introduce a law that says, in fact, those who engage in hate speech should be hanged, not those who are involved in corruption, not those, who are stealing us dry. Then they say, oh, they should be life, sentence. I think it's a senator that, got a contract, 300 contract that didn't execute anyone, that should be facing life imprisonment, really. So this thing, there must be a sense of balance. So on the one hand, hate speech is not good. We have seen it causing wars in societies like Rwanda. But what we're saying is let's use our mechanisms to address this, especially when there are existing laws. Just as Yemi was saying, you have the cybercrime, law. Why do you need, why are we so preoccupied with thinking that our solution is just for us to continue to, multiply, legislations? I don't think it's quite helpful.
Indeed. Absolutely, on all counts. But you mentioned the chapter in your book on hate speech. Can we just have an overview of what that contains? Because hate speech is a problem, which you have not attempted to deny at all. Even Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has called for global regulation of social media along 4 broad areas. He talked about harmful content, electoral integrity, then privacy and data. So there is a need for governments to regulate it. But what form should it take? Since I think most of us, especially those of us here, are in agreement that a commission is not the way to go.
Yeah. So the form it should take first is that, like I said, you need to bring, stakeholders, together. Because governments is just one of the stakeholders. They have responsibility for overall, security, no doubt about that, and the welfare of the citizens. So if we say that hate speech could affect the society, could cause war or could cause dislocation, we need, to address that. But there's also the other side of, the citizens, other side of those who operate in this environment. So you talk about social media, for example. There are people whose environment is the online environment. So even when you look at our media, you have, for example, the Guild of, corporate publishers online. You have those who work in the area of internet rights. Because don't also forget that much as we talk about hate speech, there are also issues around internet, governance. There are issues around, digital rights, because there are people who operate in the digital space. So what we're saying is that all these people have a voice. And I do recall that I had a conversation, I think this should be about 3 years ago, with the Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed. That was at the University of Lagos, where we were engaging on one-on-one on this issue of hate speech. And he showed me a text that he received where somebody was just, abusing him and so on and so forth. And he said, look, we need to do this. And I said, yes, it could be painful when you receive things like that. But don't do this without, having, dialogue in the society so that we all, agree. Because this is government doing this thing. And the way government will define hate speech, because it's saying that anybody that gets hate speech, so, okay, who defines and who decides? My fear now is that you're going to have a commission that would be, the investigator, the prosecutor, and the judge in his own case, because you are giving enormous powers to a commission to, in fact, confer death sentence on a citizen just because of hate speech. It's not done. Even for armed robbery, even for somebody that, carries a gun to kill the other person, you still go through a process of trial. And where, a lower court gives a judgment, there's also some room, for appeal. So if we're going to talk about regulation, these are the kind of things we're going to be talking about. What constitutes offense? What will be the first offense of hate speech? Now, when a decision is taken on that, can somebody have opportunity to appeal to say, well, yes, you might have accused me of hate speech, but this is what happened. I have lived in my community in darkness for 1 year. So I just got up one morning and felt another, and I said, of power, is a criminal, is a fool, because he has denied my family. That could be hate speech, but it could also be justified, hate speech. So you must give citizens room, to defend themselves. We don't want a situation whereby criticism will now be criminalized in the name of hate speech. And Yemi raised a point. What then happens? Because in my organization, we monitored coverage of the elections. We monitored hate speech. And the instances of hate speech and fake news, in some of which we documented, were actually perpetrated by those in government. In fact, in some cases, by spokespersons of political parties. And that also brings me to the fact that even political parties are also stakeholders in this issue of hate speech. And I do know that before the last elections, they had a code of conduct, just like we in the media had our own code of conduct. So the way to go about this thing is not to instill fear into the citizens. As a matter of fact, you also need a lot of public enlightenment. Some people also do things out of ignorance, especially when it comes to this social media, WhatsApp and so on. Somebody sends something to you, a video, you've not verified it, but maybe because it suits your religious fancy or fantasy, then you begin to share it, to others without realizing the implication. So our people even enlightened enough on hate speech. And so you look at the direction of, okay, you have a national orientation agency. What does that agency do? You need a period to say, okay, we are going to spend this period to have, an enlightenment and discussion with citizens on hate speech. And after that, you can then begin to say that, well, now that everybody is sufficiently aware of the dangers, these are the steps that we're going to take.
But then again, hate speech can still never necessarily or can't always be that black and white, which is where the fear comes in. Because if you are accused of hate speech by this proposed commission that's going to have some serious powers if it does come to fruition,
enormous
then
powers.
What exactly is your offense? Is it treason? Is it terrorism? So let's say it's terrorism, for example, then under Section 33(1)(a) of the Terrorism Act of 2011, you're either liable to life imprisonment or a minimum fine of 150 million naira. So is that going to be what you get for someone else's opinion on your freedom of speech? Potentially, let's say, which could be the situation that we're looking at. You could actually come out with a statement like the one that you gave. Somebody can accuse you of hate speech, and then what? You're either liable to life imprisonment or 150 million naira minimum. Is that what we're looking at here?
Honestly, it's a very confusing situation. As a matter of fact, you begin to ask yourself, what exactly, are we really looking at? Because you just mentioned the fact that you have, the terrorism, act. You have the cybercrime law. Even our laws now allows you, as we're speaking now, somebody could say, oh, that statement you offered, defamed or libeled me, then I'm taking you to court. So we have, those kind of, processes. But we're also dealing with a situation whereby, in any case, hate speech is not necessarily a new, phenomenon. Sometimes it's even rooted in culture, in cultural prejudices, the way some of us, for example, refer to the other, tribes, some, jocularly and the rest of that. So if it constitutes a problem for the society, let the society itself, understand that and come to terms with the fact that these are the steps we're going to take. But the point really is that you don't just establish a commission, that you are giving all powers, under the law,
Lanre,
just, to deal.
Let's take a short commercial break.
Okay, that one is necessary.
The conversation will continue. Thank you. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News channel. We still have with us in our Lagos studio, Lanre Arongundade, Lagos. And we've been looking at the twin subjects of hate speech and fake news and the attempt by the National Assembly of Nigeria to pass bills criminalizing both. Now, Lanre, let's get something straight. We've been commenting on the two proposed bills. But in principle, do you agree that there is need to regulate and control the social media, given the abuses to which it is, subjected to? And then secondly, if that is the case, if you agree in principle, then where do we draw the fine line between regulating the social media and the individual's right to free speech?
Well, in principle, I am not against some form of regulation. But I think first and foremost, we need to encourage more of self-regulation. And that is why I'm trying to link the enlightenment aspect of faith with what I'm talking about. Because where citizens are well informed and you know dangers of hate speech, I would want a situation whereby, a Linda Ikeji, for example, puts it on a, Twitter handle and other social media platforms and say, on this, Linda Ikeji, whatever, and then blog, any form of hate speech is not welcome because this is what hate speech constitutes. Then for all, media organizations that have, social media handles, you also do that. Then individual citizens gradually begin to do that. Groups begin to use that. I must belong to up to about 10, if not 20, WhatsApp, groups for different purposes, professional, local association of old students and so on. And then all of you begin to put it there to say that, on this platform, we do not welcome, hate speech. This is our element of hate speech. I think that would work much more effectively because you are now dealing with a kind of, moralization. Because the truth of the matter is that things that attract, force, because we need a regulation also that must not be abused, that cannot be subject to abuse. Now, so if you are talking of a commission, And that's why, okay, let's just look at the example of Ghana. In Ghana, for example, they have, a national mass media commission. What is the composition? It composes of women, gender groups, and so on. So even if you are going to have any form, I still don't feel you need any commission anyway, but at the same time, you have to bring, all these people. So that is the principle. Then there are groups that can actually drive this process. And I think that the media plays a crucial role, in this.
But how about extraordinary situations where national security is at stake? And the government even goes all the way to even shut down social media. We have had
that is not acceptable.
Cameroon,
that is internet
in
shutdown.
Egypt.
Even here in Nigeria, where I think in the Northeast they had internet shut down without consideration for how this would affect people who do their business online, and even the communication companies themselves. So there are all kinds of issues. As a matter of fact, any regulation also need to involve the industry itself, that is those who drive the communication, the social media, the likes of Facebook and threads, and they've introduced some tools that help to address this. I think Facebook has done that, WhatsApp is doing that, where WhatsApp has even gone to the level of restricting the level of shares that you can do of particular messages. So there's also a way in which you can use technology to fight hate speech or fake news online, which we are already doing in the media. And the good thing about the social media, truly, really, is that actually it's already self-regulating. These days, when somebody posts something, within a short period of time, you are likely to see people that will be saying, no, that is not true. That won't happen. Even the question of bad roads, the Minister of Works, made a statement recently and said the roads are not as bad. And people were saying, oh, they are really bad. And there was a particular road that people put online. Within a short time, other citizens said, no, that road is in Liberia. So there's no alternative to education. There's no alternative, to carry people along. Because at the end of the day, for me, whatever regulation you are talking about must not be allowed to breach the right of citizens to free expression. That is the other side. Citizens have the right to express their anger, although in reasonable ways. But there are times when you have to call spade a spade. When the government, so there is the other side. The other side too is that for those in government, how do we regulate them? How do you regulate a minister of government that lies? And we see this. A minister said, well, we have more than enough doctors in Nigeria. Let anybody go wherever they want to go. They can go. That is also a form of...
That's not hate speech.
Now, another minister came and said, now we want to recruit foreign... So if I had said that minister was lying, what would you call it?
That's not hate speech.
Oh, so that is why we're saying that's criticism. But the way I see the government going is that there's an attempt to criminalize criticism.
Yes.
Because so that is the way, because everyone was saying, how do we draw the fine line? How do we draw the fine line between criticism and somebody will not say your criticism is from a hate speech? That's why I feel that regulation should not be left in the hands of government alone. We are concerned about the well-being of this country as the government. We are talking of governance. Government is a part of governance. The civil society, the rest of us, we are also part of it. So they cannot act as if they like this country, more than the rest of us. In any case, they are supposed to be the elected representatives of the people. And the speed at which this bill is going, really, you begin to ask yourself, are we even going to have opportunity of a public hearing? Are we going to be able to make...
Oh, we have to.
Oh, we definitely have to. We should. We should,
I'm not
really.
so alarmed at this point because it's only past first reading. What is first reading? You only read the long title of the bill,
first reading,
and that's it. And then second reading, the senator will stand up and give his arguments as to why this is necessary. The Senate will now vote, and then it will now go to the committee for public hearing before getting passed. So we don't need to worry too much at this point. But I want to raise the death penalty clause. in that bill, which is extremely alarming. Now, the the criminal code allows for the death penalty. It's mandatory in the case of murder or if somebody loses their life while somebody was in the process of committing a crime. Whether or not you intended for that person to die, you will be sentenced to death. And even though the death penalty is not used every day in Nigeria, it hasn't been used now for 3 years. There's still like 1,000 people.
There's even a shortage of hangmen.
Yes, because nobody wants to do the job. It hasn't been used in 3 years, but there are like 1,000 people on death row right now. So let's go to this death penalty clause in this bill that states that if, as a result of hate speech, you get somebody killed, that mandatory death penalty ought to apply to you. How do you think that should be refined?
I think there shouldn't be anything like death penalty. You know, even the question of death penalty is a contentious issue.
It is.
People still feel that it shouldn't be applied because where there's misapplication of justice, the process cannot be reversed. We've seen so many examples, for example, in the United States, where people had been condemned to death only to realize that they actually did not, perpetrate that crime. And that's another thing. You see, the way technology works is such that it's also possible for you. We know about photoshopping. We know about all kinds of things that happen. You can clone somebody's, phone. You can hack somebody's line and make it look as if it's that person. So somebody wants to get at you. He knows that there is a law that frowns against, hate speech, and then decides to make it look as if you are the one saying it. And if you are not careful, you have a miscarriage of justice. So for me, that should not even feature, at all.
But what should the penalty be if it was up to you? If you get somebody killed because of reckless, unguarded incitement of ethnic hatred, what should the penalty be?
Well, I think what the penalty should be left at the discretion of the law courts. Let the law courts look, at the severity.
No, they only enforce the law. They don't pass it.
I don't think that sentence. I'm not in support because, like I said, you are going to have, abuses. I feel that you could have, all forms of, sanctions. You could have, fines. You could have whatever, you could decide to serve as a deterrent, but certainly not, penalty really, because people are dying as a result of, negligence of government. How many, government ministers have we said should die by hanging because of that?
Yes.
Every day you read reports of, people just dying simply because, the healthcare system is not just there.
Absolutely.
Or the fact that, the roads, are not good. They are death traps. I passed through one in Ekiti recently where half of the bridge had completely caved in, caved in. Half of the bridge had caved in. And by the time we're returning, we're told don't take that road because the other half, a truck passed it and it has collapsed. So passengers coming from this side of Ekiti State would drop, they would trek, walk across and then, take, vehicles. So if we are not saying that, so for me, really, I feel that what we need to look at is the fact that how do we get the best for our country, whether in terms of, fighting hate speech and so on. And we shouldn't be in a hurry. Although you are going to have a public hearing, but notice says that even the Senate itself or the senator raising this bill should not have some form of, dialogue. We have seen a situation whereby, based on common understanding, some bills that even the government supports even come as, private, members' bill. So there's nothing that says that government, civil society, other actors in the social media space cannot dialogue and work on a bill that will be acceptable to everybody before it's even tabled at all. There's nothing says that every bill that emanates must come from the individual,
and aside from these
senators.
Regulatory bills as well. What's interesting to see is that even if we take the social media bill that we're looking at, Nigeria has the highest number of internet users in Africa and one of the highest numbers of internet users in the world, about 116 million people. And you have bills like this coming into fruition, but then you're also asking, but what is the government even doing to harness on this number of individuals that are active internet users today? Right now, the chief executive of Twitter is in Abuja looking at ways to start a ripple effect of job creation through Twitter for techpreneurs and young techpreneurs in Nigeria. And the question is, what is the government doing? Are our priorities right or are they misplaced? You just referenced the road in Ekiti. We have terrible, dire situations on our hands, but yet what we're thinking about is bills such as this. So how can the government also start to look at the fact that we have this number of internet users and start to actually do something to harness on that and do something progressive for young Nigerians?
As a matter of fact, beyond the internet, I think Nigeria should be an IT superpower like India. And India discovered this at a time in their development when they discovered that a lot of young people are into IT. The IT skills of the average Nigerian is amazing. And I'm sure that people have shared testimonies. Some people will tell you that what their 10-year-old could do. They're into all kind of trainings on codes and so on. This is a gold mine, just waiting to be mined. And I agree with you that we should direct our energies towards in positive areas. Everything should not be negative. If you look at what people do, whether you go to computer villages all over Nigeria, it's not just in Lagos. In Abuja, they have a massive, computer village. I think we can be, an IT power.
You are quite correct. Thank you very much, Lanre. Thank you very much indeed. We hope to see you again.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.